Hello and welcome to another episode of Combat Analysis of Chivalry Medieval Warfare, where we take a look at hostile engagements, analyse them and talk about ways to improve our playstyle. My name is Marcus and I'm your host this evening. With every episode I try to bring something new to the table, and in the early stages of preparing this one I received a great anonymous tip, which was to focus on polearms, a category of weapons that up till this point has been untouched in my series. The past months I have therefore been playing a lot of halberd, and now I feel like it's time to share my adventures with the rest of the world. For this episode I've chosen footage from a couple of my most recent games. I suggest we quit stalling and hop right into it. The first game was played on Stonehill. The server was moderately populated at the time, and I think that laid a good basis for interesting engagements. This was recorded the day after the daylight savings time adjustment, which reset most of my game settings. The graphics might therefore differ a bit from my previous videos. As you can see, there's a lot of fighting going on down in the village, but as per usual I take the high road with focus on the objective. You see me hiding behind the house here for a bit, and that's simply because of the archer on the other side. Once I pick up the torch I actually get so stressed by him that I throw it on the wrong house, but oh well, at least I didn't get shot. At the same time I spot my first victim approaching from behind, and choose to take care of him immediately. It tends to be a good idea to deal with enemies immediately, as the risk of them receiving backup increases with every passing second. He doesn't fall for my initial drag and then proceeds to miss his attack, but I parried anyway and have to wait for him to attack again, since his wind up is so much shorter than mine. I like fighting mostly with ripostes against men-at-arms, as they're very likely to trade and flinch me if I don't. That's a slight difference from playing knights, where the main concern is the dodge. That makes ripostes very volatile and very costly in stamina if they dodge and I'm forced to CFTP. The halberd has such a good reach that I don't have to worry as much about dodges, and if we just swing back and forth for a little bit, I will eventually outstam them. Luckily he fails to parry my slash riposte, and since I was missing a bit of health from the start, he dies from just one hit. I'm not there fast enough to help out my ally, and I'm forced to take on both of them alone. As the vanguard runs in, I circle round hoping for a free hit. Sadly, the overhead comes a bit too late and he manages to parry despite not CFTPing. I still score a hit on the unsuspecting knights, but the crucial thing to note is that my ability to combo goes out the window with the vanguard's successful parry, and therefore I'm forced to wait for them to attack me. The vanguard is still far away when the knight's attack lands, so I take the opportunity to counter. Unfortunately I end up missing and have to CFTP the vanguard. This costs me a bunch of stamina and I still take damage as he drags the stab around my parry. As neither of them are attacking and the knight seems to be one hit from dying, I go for an aggressive stab. After his next attack, I try to control and damage both of my opponents with an overhead that lines up with both of them. I do manage to hit the guy behind me, but unfortunately he doesn't die from it. The van in front is too far away, but I catch him and flinch him with my follow-up stab. Yet I try for another overhead on both my opponents, miss both of them, but yet again the van is caught by my follow-up stab, and this time he dies. As I turn around and start swinging at the knight, I take an arrow in the chest and the fight ends. It looks like the knight would have fainted to parry me there anyway, but I'm pretty sure I could have killed him shortly after had I not gotten shot. The next fight takes place a bit closer to home, and here I again have multiple opponents. After parrying the initial charge, I'm reluctant to go on the offensive, as there is potential for another charge from the second vanguard, and my stamina pool simply isn't big enough to tank both of them. Once the spear guard stops running, I finally feel comfortable with attacking, but as I wind up, he does too and I have to feint to parry. He misses, and I optimistically wind up again. This time my FTP is not fast enough, and he scratches me with a spear. There's really no reason to play this aggressively with a bird against a spear, but thankfully the damage on the slash I take isn't too high. Here, Silo shows up and starts facehugging the van. He actually doesn't land a single hit on the guy and forces out 2 unsuccessful parries instead. This makes it very easy for me to hit him in between while the van's parry is in recovery. I am unsure if this was on purpose, but it definitely helped me out. We move up and get ready to take on the other 2 guys. When the man-at-arms strikes, I go in for a hit in recovery, but he CFTPs, and it's not until now that I realize I've put myself in a bad position, right in between my 2 opponents. This is giving the van an unnecessarily good opening on me. Initially I should have made an effort to get up on the right side of the man-at-arms, so as to keep both of them in my field of vision. In an attempt to salvage the situation, I go for a slash riposte, but thankfully the van stays quite passive, and even though my attack missed him, I am now no longer in danger of getting attacked from behind. Again I flinch him with my follow-up stab, and even though I overdrag my overhead, we manage to kill him shortly after. The man-at-arms dies to a stab riposte, and as we finish this fight, my team finishes the objective. So let's skip forward to the next stage. Alright, we've started pushing the ram and got the first wave of enemies approaching. I'm currently hovering because I'm anticipating a charge and can see even more enemies headed our way. Taking on 2 opponents is generally fine, but due to the approaching man-at-arms and second knight, there's simply too many for me to handle at the moment. Here we've baited the spear guard far away from his friends, and now killing him is much easier. His vision is impaired by the fire, and he completely misdirects his attempted parry on my overhead. Now I want to try to help Ultsi kill Forol, the Agathian knight, but he does a good job of hiding behind Ultsi. Here I'm trying to dodge his attack but misjudge the distance and take damage. Right as I start stabbing again, I notice he actually ripostes off the vanguard attack, and in order not to get hit by this, I cancel my attack and prepare to parry. But his sword bites the woodwork, and he actually falls for my feint, even though it wasn't intentionally aggressive. Sadly he's still out of recovery before my next attack hits him, but at this point he's completely surrounded and we manage to land the killing blow. Here I'm resetting, getting back my stamina and a little bit of health before I get back into the fight. I want to quickly explain my reasoning behind the left-sided approach on my targets here, with the friendly knight standing right in between us blocking my way. If I were using a bastard sword, the most natural approach would be on the right side of the knight, as the 3 default attacks on the bastard swords have a right-sided trajectory. Because of this I minimize the risk of dealing team damage by approaching on the right side. But on the polearms, the stabs originate from the left side instead, and since this is such a strong component of the halberd, I think it's important to approach on the left side when possible. This is one of the things I had to adjust to in my playstyle when I changed from bastard sword to halberd. Okay, this guy dies pretty quickly and I move on to my next target. I managed to get a free stab on the spearguard and follow up with a dragged overhead. I'm quick on the reaction to his riposte, but when I counter riposte, I mistake the man-at-arms safety parry for an attack and throw out a panic parry on my own. As a result I take a stab in the shoulder. Here I try to bypass the man-at-arms parry with a feint, but it takes an arrow in the head at the same time, and I think this might have flinched his parry. But ultimately it doesn't matter because he dies to my follow-up stab anyway. I feel like I see an opening on the spear here, which is why I make a lunge at him, but to my great surprise he actually feint to parries and counters my attack. At this point my reserves are completely drained and I have to back off and regenerate. Here I probably should have attacked him when he swung out of reach, but I was being very cautious due to my low health. It actually played to my favor in the end, as he lost vision on me during the slash and still expected me to attack him. Therefore he panic padded afterwards as soon as he turned towards me, and this opened up for my killing blow. This part is kind of interesting. I'm not sure if the man-at-arms knowingly made this play, but since Ultsi and I had him in crossfire, and he moved through the canal opposite our direction, he guided our attacks into each other, and I ended up hitting Ulti. This is partly due to him moving a bit too much up the levee, but still well done by the man at arms. Here he misses and I capitalize on it by attacking, but he follows up with a CFTP. He runs off into the tunnel and here I'm reluctant to follow, cause however I choose to play this, I will need 2 attacks to kill him, and the only attacks viable inside is the stab, which I cannot combo. At the same time there is a decent amount of Agathians behind me, and if they catch wind of me I'll get completely sandwiched inside. All I need is one look to find a much better target, namely the knight who is one hit from dying and hasn't yet noticed me. One quick stab in the back does the job, and now I fall back a bit to fight alongside my allies. Here I do a fake reverse overhead, which bypasses his parry, and then a feint which opens up for the finishing stab. Sadly the man at arms gets dangerously close and I panic parry in response. I make a small attempt to duck the stab but end up dying nonetheless. In the upcoming fight I think Ulti and I display some pretty decent teamwork. I'm hovering as usual and going for the CFTP force. Here Ulti misses, which ensures a guaranteed hit for me. Foral tries to reposition but also fails to parry in time for my stab, and Ulti comes in immediately after with a chop. Against this vanguard, he does a good job of wrapping around the guy, and we can with ease attack from multiple directions. The color of your helmet doesn't matter if you cannot see your opponent. Skipping forward to the next fight I found interesting. Here I spot 2, potentially 3 opponents, and a good way to bottleneck their potential to surround me is by running back into the tunnel where they have to get in line. First I of course have to run into the rocks so that Bagatellas can catch up to and hit me. But then I successfully stab him and run back in hope of baiting out another attack. He sits and waits after my second stab to see if I will panic parry, but I keep my composure, and after his attack I use his technique against him, but with better results. Since I have now stabbed him in what looked to be the torso twice, any attack, even a slash to the legs, will be enough to kill him. I play overly aggressive and try for another stab, but have to feint to parry as he utilizes his initiative. Merciless as I am, I do a filthy stab feint and finish him off thereafter. Yet again time to regenerate stamina and then rejoin the fight. After killing this knight I play safe, do a bit of hovering and just wait for the good opening. And there is my first legit death of the game. I start off with an optimistic stab on Bagatellas as he leaps off the bridge. Here I should have gotten a feint to parry out in time. I score a good flinch on him thereafter and also move efficiently around him to keep the other knight at bay, but after missing Bagatellas I tried too hard to finish him off instead of feinting to parry the spear on the left and died to this instead. My clumsiness here is easier to understand if you take the previous engagement into account. See, the moment Bagatellas showed up again I was intimidated, cause I had just killed him with a stab feint and I felt his eagerness to get revenge on me. That's why I went for the aggressive stab, partly because I knew he might overread it after the previous fight, but also because I expected him to feint me, and in fear of this, I went for this sort of gambling play. The same idea could also explain his running off after the trade, as a way to dodge any potential feints from me. Even though this is a legit tactic, he doesn't quite cover enough ground, and as I do indeed feint, this gives me just enough reach to finish him afterwards. I continue to prioritize Bagatellas too much, neglecting the spear, and this ultimately leads to my demise. And this is why I like to analyze entire games in my episodes, instead of cherry-pick clips from 100 different matches. Playing the fights in chronological order, with focus on actual players and their personalities, improves the storytelling, and in turn the actual combat analysis, because the story is relevant to the fights. We're not fighting bots in Chivalry, but rather people who go into fights with expectations, fears and personal vendettas. To truly understand what will happen, what did happen and why, it's helpful to have a grasp of the underlying psychology as well. And just to contradict everything I just said, I'm actually gonna hop over to an entirely different game, because the rest of this one is boring as hell. The second game was played on Drunken Bazaar. It's a beautiful map, but horribly balanced. On the two first spawns I ended up dying to archers, so let's have a look at the first real fight of the game. I make a minor mistake here by initiating with a slash, as this guy hasn't seen me yet, and I know the hit will be free. I should therefore use an attack that does as much damage as possible. I'm not sure if I plan to do a fake or real reverse here, but either way missing is pretty dangerous, as I quickly deplete my stamina and the drain on the mall is super high. If I go into burnout and this guy knows how to headshot, I'm dead, and this is a very unnecessary risk to take. Before continuing the fight here, I wait for my stamina to replenish. It's pretty clear that my ally is going to get hit in recovery here, so in order to not get hit myself afterwards, I have to parry. As soon as I know he's out of reach, I force out a safe TP. Sadly, my ally gets ganked from behind by ulti and ends up dying, leaving me alone with our opponents. I get off an efficient overhead on both of them, and Bagatellas is now very low on stam. Ulti does feint me, but Bag also attacks at the same time, so I end up parrying them both anyway. Sadly, I do get traded in the riposte, and by far my biggest mistake is going for yet another stab directly after. My wind up is much longer, so I have no chance of hitting him before he hits me. Had I just waited here instead and gone for the parry into riposte, I would have been much more likely to win the fight. There is always the risk of ulti trading my riposte and me dying that way, but anything is better than going for a stab gamble after a trade with a longsword. The next fight is pretty big and takes place around the cart. I get a clean dodge and hit and recovery on the Dobags to start things off, but he completely disregards my subsequent feint. Lucky for me, he does attack my ally instead, so I don't take damage because of it. Here I do a successful target switch, but fail to parry when I get attacked afterwards. I continue to misplay by attempting to stab right through intox, and have to miss on purpose so as to not deal team damage. It would have been smarter to move up on her right side directly and overhead from there. I successfully hit the knight in front, but get my combo broken by the one next in line. Ulti misses and loses vision, then panics, and I manage to bypass his parry with a stab. I maintain a high tempo and force out a safe TP from the guy called Hacker, and he eventually dies to an overhead riposte. I do think this is worth doing, even though it means I get hit by a fox in the process. As soon as he makes a lunge at me, I run back to dodge it, and because he doesn't combo, I land a lethal stab while he's in recovery. Overall a pretty good fight. Some small mistakes with parrying and positioning when winding up, but otherwise I think I did a good job of pressuring the enemy and keeping all of them in my field of vision. Seconds after, I do get twatted by an archer, but I suppose that's just how it goes, eh? At this point they've virtually completed the first stage, but we'll try to delay it as best we can anyway. Pretty flawless stab on this guy without hurting my allies. Here it's hard to see what happens, but I actually don't hit the guy, which you can tell from the stamina loss. The trade with Jack Small and the subsequent greatsword overhead was enough to kill him. I'm contemplating helping Jack out, but as soon as I see baby Ragnar approaching from the back, I decide to take care of him instead. He swings out of reach and I overhead in recovery. Then he disregards my stab and falls for the final dragged overhead as well. By the time we see the archer, it is already too late and the objective is lost. Here I started attacking way too early, winding up for bagatellas, but I realized Pom is still in the way, so I steer out of his way, even though he dies just before my release. Had I just waited a second longer, I would have known if Pom would die or not, and could then have hit Baga in recovery. Here I finally score a hit, but then decide to go for a target switch on the archer. This is a bit uneducated in my opinion, seeing as he is an archer, and it isn't necessarily his first choice to go into melee range. Furthermore, it becomes evident that I'm switching, since I do a slash instead of overhead as follow-up, and the cart is obviously going to block my slash if I choose to attack Baga. The only reasonable target left is therefore the archer, and if he realizes this, he can adjust accordingly. After the missed stab, I have no love left for these guys, and decide to bail entirely. It's not until after watching the replay that I noticed Intox was running up behind them just as I teleported away. And in hindsight, I should have stuck around to help out, but alas.
Thank you. Come, you tedious fool, to the purpose.
So, obviously the biggest issue here is that Intox dies right off the bat. Now, I somehow have to control and damage both of my opponents several times in order to win. You'll notice how I'm continuously backpedaling from the opponent who's attacking me, just to buy a little bit of extra time to parry. When given the opportunity, I go for riposts that line up with both of them. There is no way to win this fight with an equal trade in stamina and damage. It's really sad that I get traded in this riposte, since I do end up hitting both of them, and this otherwise would have laid a good basis for a follow-up attack that could continue to control and potentially damage them. I'll continue to parry 2 more attacks and do a slash riposte. I feel like this response is a bit too weak in this situation, it's simply too easy to see coming. When Fox lunges at me again, I'll move to the left in order to stay out of range of the wetsuit man. Lucky for me, this results in him team killing Fox, as he tries to swing at me despite being body blocked. After he parries my ult overhead, I'm starting to run out of options. There is simply no way I can keep parrying this guy without getting knocked into burnout. I do get yet another reverse overhead on him, but it's just not enough. I would have had to land both of them in the head if I wanted him to die from just that. What I should have done afterwards is to immediately run away. I try to backpedal, but don't get far enough. I could have attempted a parry as well, but it wouldn't have done anything. I would have gone into burnout and then died to the next coming overhead anyway, as the mole overhead burns 16 stamina on a halberd parry. I cannot complain too much about my footwork and parries in this fight. There are just some small mistakes here and there that made it too hard for me to come out on top. Alright, next fight, around the cart. I start off with a parry and wind up a slash afterwards. Just as I pointed out earlier, the slash is quite weak, but one thing that is good about it is that it's got a slightly shorter wind up than the stab, rendering it a safer option when trying to flinch an opponent. The important thing is that I follow up with a stab, as a slash and stab in the torso is still 2 shots of Vanguard, whereas any other 2-part combo involving a slash doesn't. Ultimately, I don't end up killing the guy, as the ulti finishes the job for us instead. It's kind of hard to tell in the clusterfuck, but I'm quite confident I managed to stab him instead, so it wasn't all for naught. After I parry Ragnar, he goes for a blatant gamble. He gets flinched and overwhelmed by me and my ally. This time I get a nice hit and wind up on this guy, and he actually loses 30 points of stamina as a result. After parrying my stab, he riposts and target switches nicely onto my ally, who gets 1 shot. But you'll notice how he leans forward so much in order to strike first, that the mole literally bites the dust after, which withdraws his permission to combo, and renders him defenseless against my slash. It would have been preferable if I didn't feint my follow-up stab after, which was a precaution I took in anticipation of the night swing. But once sure of his inability to reach me, I wind up again and manage to flinch him mid-combo anyway. Here he stabs out of reach again, and while this is another great opportunity for me to counter, the moment is ruined by the jab planted in my chest. After parrying both of the knights, I try for another reverse riposte, but end up missing the crucial attack on the knight behind me, who right thereafter stabs me to death. Going for the reverse is a really risky play. I essentially need him to die from that reverse if it's gonna be worth it. Otherwise I will be stuck in between the two guys and die to whichever one I'm not facing. Seeing as I only landed one stab on the knight previously, my chance of killing him with the overhead is basically 0. One stab and overhead can finish off a knight, but only if both land in the head, otherwise it's a 3 hit to kill. Again, the jab did ruin a great opportunity for me, and took a big portion of my health as well, but that doesn't mean I couldn't have salvaged the situation afterwards. Alright, in this next fight I'm running in to give Intox a hand, and I get a nice flinch mid combo. Now here I stab the ground because Pom gets in my way. This is just me not positioning well enough and being slightly too eager to attack. I could have gone on the left and stabbed, or on the right to overhead instead. I get twatted from behind, and here it's actually quite tricky, because you can see Pom moving right to left in this strike, which leads me to believe he's gonna continue that way, so I go on the right, but he feints and stops and then attacks on the right flank again, which again puts him in the way of my attack. But it was less my fault this time, I think. I continue with the slash in hope of hitting the van eventually, but a man-at-arms pops out of nowhere and stabs me to blazes. I actually had to rewatch the replay several times before I saw where the guy actually came from, because he hid behind the vanguard exceptionally well up till the moment he struck. In this fight I get a nice combo off on the man-at-arms, with a stab flinch into slash feint into a lethal stab. Now he does die to Intox before I hit him, but I definitely would have, had she not. It's actually very unfortunate that she gets javelined here, because otherwise we were doing pretty well. She had just forced the van into a CFTP, and I had just flinched the knight attacking her from behind, which gives us a lot of options to work with. But even after she dies, I feel like I'm in an okay place. He gets another overhead on the knight and keep the van well away from attacking me still. Until, what the hell, where did he come from? I panic parry right after he hits me and die to the bardish. Ulti caught me completely off guard. I had no idea he was anywhere in the area until he hit me. If we go back to long before the fight, we can see him run up on the high ground, but then he disappears for the longest time, until he teleports behind me in nothing personal kid style. It just goes to show how important it is to keep track of your enemies. I can't say I could have done much myself to prevent this from happening this time. It's mostly just well done by him. Here I make a pretty big mistake by going on the archer, when I can clearly see Ulti running up on Jack from behind. The smart thing to do would be to control Ulti and prevent him from damaging Jack. Now with the cards played as they were, Ulti scored a double hit on Intox and Jack, and then on Jack and me before I cancelled his combo. Which really didn't need to happen if I just planned ahead a little better. But once we've all got him in our sights, finishing him off is no big deal. We push forward against the Agathians. I dodge the slash and force out the safe TP, and I'm dead again. This time it's completely my fault. Running up to the vanguard, this guy's bloody throwing axes at me. And I still completely ignore him when he runs up on our flank and jumps down. I mean, his shadow is even perfectly visible. I definitely should have kept a better eye on him. There's no excuse for dying here. We surround this man-at-arms and I get a nice stab on the side. I circle round and force out a safe TP. This exchange may not look like much, but with the 30 stam lost on his safe TP, plus parrying my 2 attacks and then the pole hammer, he's lost a total of 69 stamina. And that's probably why he decides to back off for a bit and not continue the fight. This buys us time to deal with the archer, and then we can continue to team up on the wetsuit man. This is a good example of a fight where our teamwork is just a lot better than theirs. They're devoting too many resources to pushing the cart, even though they still have to cut through all of us if they want to push it all the way. I get off a nice feint on this guy and follow up with a stab, which bypasses his premature parry, and he gets killed by an archer. We move up again and prepare to take on Hacker. I was so baffled by Pom's movement, cause again he cockblocked me as I went in for the stab, even though he was clearly approaching on the right flank up to this point. After watching the replay I realized it was due to the panic parry he threw out after the slash, so in order not to get hit while in parry recovery, he tried to dodge the van's next attack by moving, which is a legitimate instinct, but it didn't turn out that well in this case, as I could have safely flinched the van anyway had Pom just stayed out of my way. Pom does get hit by the reverse, but I still flinch the guy mid-combo. I wind up again but have to feint to parry the riposte. Then he does a premature parry on my dragged ult slash, and thus the fight is concluded. Here we're getting ready for another go, and I'm gonna wait with a dissection of this fight until after it's over.
Follow me. This way. That one's on me.
That fight was quite the shit show. I start things off with a stab, and I'm actually uncertain if I cancel it intentionally or got flinched by the dagger. Either way, he parries in response and neither of us take damage from each other. Now I've caught wind of the second knight and circled back to lend a hand with him as best I can. They're now both engaging in talks, and at the beginning of my stab here it looks very promising as he's not at all facing my way. But then he turns around in time and parries with ease. Here both the van and I start winding up at the same time, so I cancel my attack and parry. Little did I know he was going to miss all along. Instead of keeping on expending my stamina to parry, I run back, hoping for some out of range attacks. Once I turn around I go for a feint on Ulti, but thanks to decent footwork, he manages to get out of parry recovery in time for my second stab. Here Intox dies, and I have yet to score a single hit on our enemies. I decide to counter riposte on Ulti's stab, even though I have two other attackers inbound who definitely are willing to trade on these terms. And the reason for this is just that there are simply too many of them for me to ever score a clean counterattack. With two opponents it makes sense to find an opportune moment to strike, but with three it's virtually impossible, especially while cornered as I am here. Miraculously I actually come unscathed out of the slash, as both of them miss me by just a hair. I follow up with a feinted slash in hope of controlling the van and ulti, while I target switch and stab the second knight behind me. But as I turn around to do so, I find he's already moved on, presumably thinking I was dead as hell regardless. I also take a stab in the back from the van, who neglected to parry my slash feint. After parrying Bagatellas, I strafe to the left to keep the van at bay, and do a dragged ult overhead, in hope of dealing damage without losing too much stam in the process. Ironically I instead end up missing completely, because of how he moves and how excessively I drag the strike. Then Baga makes the mistake of winding up again, despite parrying in response to my previous attack. I can with ease flinch him since I'm comboing, and score a hit on the van as well, as he just panic parried. Ulti misses me at the same time, and since he doesn't combo, he also cannot save TP, and thus he takes my next coming stab in the gut. With the same attack, I manage to delete the van from the fight. Sadly I end up feinting to parry in anticipation of Baga's attack, but since he is out of range, this just means that my parry goes into recovery. If I had continued to attack, I would have hit both him and Ulti, and since I landed an overhead on him earlier, and he got scuffed by his van ally, it's not impossible that this would have killed him. It's not super likely, but not out of the question either. Ulti most likely would have died if I hit him, as I already landed a slash and a stab on him. But this entire engagement was very stressful for me, so it's hardly surprising that I couldn't make the most educated play in the heat of the moment. Let's have a look at one more fight before we wrap this episode up. This time I make a better choice of attack when coming up on this guy from behind. The fork guard swings out of reach, and due to the nature of the spears, he goes into recovery and I score a free hit. Since he panics after, that gives me another opportunity to land a strike, but he ends up needing 3 attacks to die, since I used a slash at the start. It's not a big deal in this particular fight, as he dies so quickly anyway, but it's something to keep in mind. I do actually get fainted here, but managed to read it. It was a bit clumsy of me to do the auto overhead here, but I didn't get much of a warning before Jack ran into it. In any case, it did work towards emptying out his stamina pool. One miss and CFTP later, he's completely out, which opens up for a hammer slash from Jack. That little weapon is actually brutal, as long as you manage to hit someone with it. I turn my attention towards the right target, and stop Bagatelles from wreaking havoc upon my team. I tank a throwing axe in the process, but we decimate their numbers quickly regardless. Hacker mistimes the parry on the saber meme and dies to my final overhead. And that concludes this episode of our little series. The game carried on a while longer, and we ultimately lost. Hardly a surprise, given the balancing job, or lack thereof. But no matter how ridiculous some of the other maps are, you need a break from Dark Forest from time to time. This episode took some time to make, I'll admit, but I'm still excited about this series and I will keep them coming. So thank you for watching this episode of Combat Analysis. I hope you enjoyed and hopefully even learned something. Don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to see more of these. If not, maybe we'll just meet on the battlefield instead. That is where the real magic happens after all. Alright, Berg is out.
Thank you.